preliminary. This is our graduating class. So all classes constantly in the rooms that were assigned to them. So this is consequently the room where the graduating class is working. Okay, and this is our second lecture for the course of the history of the Russian Church. And I will be talking today about the organization of the Russian Church. So I hope you are successfully going through the Fennels textbook. And this is really a book I'm proud of. I wish it also exists in Russian. And John Fennell is known for founding his research on the first-hand evidence. So basically he works with primary sources and he makes those primary sources available to you in English. And we have a little information about the first Russian metropolitan. Traditionally, right, the sort of hagiographically, his name was Michael. But we really don't have evidence from chronicles. And there is also mention in chronicles about Leon. And speaking of Michael, even there are some speculations that he was of Syrian origin. But it doesn't matter, his ethnic background doesn't really matter. What we know is that he was a Byzantine, right? And surprisingly, in the 20th century, Russian scholarship supported this claim that he was the first Russian metropolitan, right? That he was buried in Kiev's monastery. Okay. So therefore, there are two schools of thought. One claims Michael, and church tradition holds it this way, that Michael was the first Russian metropolitan. And the second school of thought subscribes to the notion that it was Leon. Okay. It's also important to remember that the Russian metropolitanate was part of the Byzantine Church, and it was in fact bigger than normal Greek metropolitanates, because in the Greek tradition, the Byzantine tradition, metropolitanates were lower than metropolitans, were lower than archbishops, right? So there were a number of prominent archbishops, like Archbishop of Neo Caesarea was in charge of, was a participant for the election of new patriarch and part of the, and also one who would consecrate a new Byzantine patriarch. And not all metropolitans enjoy this status. So metropolitans, basically, it comes from the Greek word matir polis, like matir, mother town. So those are major cities of the ancient world. Some of them later on became patriarchate, the most prominent, the most significant cities of the ancient Roman world, like Antioch or Alexandria. Okay. And for the Russian Church, which was bigger than normal metropolitanates, a metropolitan was assigned a point from Constantinople. And this situation lasted from, I don't know, I hope you can see it, right? So this situation lasted from 988 until 1448. So that's important. 988, 1448, right? So this is really important time, right? Because this is period when Russian Church existed as a part of the Byzantine Church. In 1948, Russian Church withdrew from this subordination and became independent. And remain independent in such status actually until nowadays. Okay. So metropolitans were sent from Constantinople to Rus. Was this a good thing? The metropolitans were sent over to Russia. Was it something intrusive? You know, something that they would push, lobby for any favors for the Byzantines? Mostly, I would say it was a positive thing, because during those several hundred years, metropolitans were able, more or less, they were able to stand behind truly Christian attitudes toward various issues. Like they were very uneasily manipulated. And we saw a striking contrast following the time when Russia started to elect their metropolitans on their own, that it became much easier to manipulate your own subject, whereas those metropolitans, they were kind of Byzantine metropolitans, they were kind of like diplomats, and they enjoyed some immunity, and they were not that easily manipulated. And therefore, in time of conflicts, conflicts between various competing monarchs, they would just a second, some adjustment here. Okay. So they would just try to take Christian position, basically, not really subscribing to sides and taking sides, but they would argue for Christian attitudes toward violence and stop and argue about necessity to stop bloodshed and things like that. So that's what I mean was positive that our metropolitans were Greeks. And also there are some suspicions and prejudice, and until nowadays, among Russians toward the Byzantines or Greeks, and I think it's not very fair, because people who were sent to Muscovite, to Kievan Rus, were people of good caliber, of good capacity, good qualities. And you will also can compare with the person of Blessed Theophylact of Ohrid. Blessed Theophylact of Ohrid, he was a Byzantine archbishop in Bulgaria, and he is known for his exegesis, for his commentaries on Holy Scripture, and sort of he represents kind of people who would send by Byzantines outside of the empire. Okay. According to some lists, Russian Church was number 61. According to other lists, it was number 17. So, during the Pre-Mongolian period, right, and Pre-Mongolian period lasted from of the history of the Russian Church lasted from 1988 until 1240. So during this period, 12 dioceses were opened within the Russian Church. And of course, if you think about Russia, right, let's see if I don't think I will be able to provide you with a map this time, but try to look up on the internet the Russian basic map and see where Kiev is and where Novgorod is. Those are two major competing cities. So, and Novgorod from the very beginning also began to fight for exclusive rights and was the main competitor against Kiev. And also we know that in Novgorod there was election of a prince, like prominent wealthy city of Novgorod would make offers, and then they would approach somebody like a prince from some smaller principalities and offered him a contract. This was very unusual, but that's how it was until the 15th century. And Archbishop of Novgorod was very important member of this arrangement. So it was important who would be an archbishop in Novgorod, right? And Novgorod always felt very independent, and also independent against the Kievan Rus, right? The rest of the Kievan Rus. So clergy of the cathedral, they would make a presbyterium, which is like a consultative body that was known in the ancient church, like in the North Africa, for instance. And this presbyterium was cathedral clergy. Okay, and also from the beginning, local princes, they tried to make sure that the local bishop would be a person with whom with whom the princes would feel at ease to work together. So that was also important, that the state always from the beginning would try to control the church, and it's important that the church was invited by the state to Russia. Okay? And of course, clergy, parish clergy, they were from the beginning part of what is called Russian Levite caste, because it was kind of naturally that if you are son of a priest, you would know from your children years how to be in the altar. Also, most likely your father would teach you how to read. So why would you take somebody from elsewhere? Especially also if people were taxed, they could not just easily change. That's one of the major reasons why people were locked in their classes because of taxation. If you're taxed as a peasant, somebody would have to pay your tax, and why would people let you go and be ordained? So it was kind of natural that clergy would belong to their caste. Okay, so basically all people, all Christians, were associated with their particular parishes, right? And also we remember that Christianization most efficiently would affect city, the same as it was in Europe, city dwellers, and then rural residents. So, and the same was in Russia, but with exception that also it would depend on Slavic population and non-Slavic, like Finno-Ugric population or Finno-Ugric background. Those people of non-Slavic background, they were Christianized later on in the history. Right? But not everyone was allowed to hear confessions. Only clergy, as it is in the Greek church, who were like pneumatiki, which is in Russian duchovnik, sort of epneumatiki would be Greek term, right? Pneumatikos. So people who were installed as confessors, installed as people who were allowed to listen other people's confession, which is, in my opinion, it's a good thing. Okay, also clergy was married, right, the same way as it was in Byzantium. And what were sources of income, right? People depended a lot of crops, of produces, of things that were delivered, like a natural households, basically products of agriculture, and they were paid to a significant degree in those things, and much less in money. Some churches, they would receive what is known as ruga, which is assigned amount either of goods or money and provided by a local ruler. Okay, so and there were particular days of the year when clergy were paid from their congregations. So, right, and what kind of law did Russian Church have? at the beginning, right? Basically, there was translation of Byzantine imperial and ecclesiastical laws, and imperial laws were known as nomi, and ecclesiastical laws were known as canones. So this combination produced a hybrid collection which is known by its type as Nomocanon. Right? So this is, when you hear Nomocanon, it's not a proper name, it's just a type that denotes organization of this particular compendium, a particular collection. And it means there are imperial, Byzantine imperial laws and Byzantine ecclesiastical laws. So in the 9th century, St. Methodius, the same Methodius who became an apostle for Slavs, translated this into Slavic language, in Slavonic, and this collection it's the gave birth to the first known family of books. That's Nomocanos. Okay, let's stay here. Right. So also we know from the very beginning there was a special decree, Ustav, special statute issued by Holy Prince Vladimir. This is probably the first real proper law of the Russian Orthodox Church. And then there are interesting canonical monuments, canonical documents, and among one of them canonical responses by Archbishop Nifont, which was very bright, capable, knowledgeable hierarch of the Greek Church, of the Byzantine Church, sent to Novgorod. And it really demonstrates what I meant earlier regarding strong message, gospel message. And you see people supply questions that are very sort of slavish in their nature regarding the letter of the law. Like one question that I remember: what should a child become immune if he played with another child before the matings of Pascha, and they playfully hit each other in teeth with an egg. You just think about asking a bishop such a question, especially put it in writing, that was really something very important for you if you do this, and he just basically dismissed this question. And there are many other dismissions, like for instance, another question was, okay, somebody put a patch on his vestment, and it turned out to be that previously this fabric was used by a woman, so what should we do now? And his response was very brilliant, saying, what do you mean is the woman is defiled? I mean, what's the problem with this? What's the problem with women? So you see, kind of, really, it's like gospel, it gives very essential, highlights very essential nature of things, and the question, basically not answering to the literal question, but answering the question behind the question, similar to what Lord did when he was confronted and challenged. Right, so Russians somehow didn't have a soft spot for bodily mutilations as their elder brothers, the Byzantines did. So mostly Russians would be happy with paying fines if you can afford it for your crimes, okay? And for some of the crimes, particularly for when crimes that were connected with infidelity, that were connected with cheating on measures in the marketplace, church would benefit. So basically, tax for a number of crimes would go to church and would basically contribute to the church. Right. So also bishops and the church would represent moral police force. So particularly some of the crimes would be in the jurisdiction depiction of the church would try crimes connected with divorce and sort of moral issues, right? And it was typical of the Russian church at this time. It was typical of Saint Fyodor the Student, which was taken from the famous Byzantine monastery. And some modern researchers, scholars, I believe Dr. Paul Meindorf is among them, actually attribute a sign of cross with two fingers, to this typica. So basically they say that the fact that the Council of 100 Chapters, 1551, had to argue against this way of putting cross over oneself meant that there were other practices. So, and this typica lasted until the beginning of the 16th century, when it was suppressed, but what is now conventionally called Agiopolite typica of Holy City of Jerusalem, right, of St. Sabas also. And singing was Greek. Some ancient icons appeared, for instance, the Mother of God of Vladimir icon, which is a Byzantine icon, is known from that time, from the Pre-Mongolian Rus. And the Russians also from the very beginning had started to demonstrate their own type of piety, particularly they liked pilgrimage. They would go places, and we know there are accounts about visiting Holy Land in the 12th century by Russian neighbor Daniel, who was very generously received in the Latin-occupied Jerusalem, while it was a Latin kingdom. Then he traveled also to the Queen City, to Constantinople. So Russians kind of started to demonstrate, to elaborate the features of their piety, and you can see the Russian piety and Greek piety are quite different until nowadays. Okay, this was lecture 2 for the class of the history of the Russian Church. We were talking about organization of this church. Keep follow syllabus, keep follow your readings, and get back to me if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention.